I'm sure you'll be well versed in the fact that simple economics or simple economic theory has meant that the price of renting a property across the UK, in Wrexham particularly as well, has made a dramatic leap in the last 12 months. I could quote you where there's been 20%, in excess of 20% increases in the rental market generally. Give me your view in terms of where you think this kind of increase has come from.
They reckon 1 in 6 people who've sold in the last year have not gone and bought on because they haven't been able to find another property. So therefore, we've got an influx of 200,000 or 300,000 people in the UK who weren't planning to rent, who've now come into the market, and again, which means that that's increased demand. We've also had a number of people who've wanted to move because of lifestyle, because they live in a flat and they want to live in a house and they've been cooped up in 3 lockdowns and they say, we're not going to do this again. So again, there's greater demand there. And then we've got a curtailing of supply because we've had other people who've not necessarily moved. We've had other landlords who've basically cashed in on a decent market. Yeah. They were probably thinking to themselves, I'm going to sell in 23, 24, but they saw the way prices were going and thought, hey, we'll cash out. So you've got a curtailing of supply and more people looking to rent. Will it continue? I don't believe it will continue at the same rate. But even though you've seen that 20% rise, if you go back to 2008 and compare to what's happened to rents in 2008 to today, even with that 20% increase, we're still at around inflation. Because if you'd have gone back a year, rents have not been rising up with the same level as inflation. Sure. Because what you tend to find with rents tend to follow not what's happening to house prices, but what's happening to wages. But because we've had this, few people selling off, few people wanting to come into the market, because or not wanting to change house, or they've sold but they can't buy anything. We've had external factors which have driven prices up. I mean, it's interesting. What can happen to prices? If you go back to London 12 months ago, rents in London and the big cities were 15-20% lower than they were in 2020, in start of 21, compared to just before the lockdown. They just dropped off the face of the earth. Now they've bounced back 20-35%. That's not because landlords are buying and selling houses. That's simply because all the kids in London went back to live with their mum for 6 months. My advice to tenants is going with open eyes. You might have to pay a bit more, but you can always leave after 6 or 12 months on the tenancy. And to landlords, if the rental growth is there, then property prices will always, we're not building enough houses. Property prices will, in the long term, always outgrow inflation, and you get the income as well. It's a win-win situation. As long as you've got a professional agent who will look after the property, won't take all the rubbish from the tenant with leaking taps at 12 in the night, you've got a great income. Because the simple fact is this, Vaughan. We need to build 300,000 houses a year in the UK, and have done since 2000, to keep up with demand. Okay? The average number of properties that we have built in the UK since the year 2000 is 157,000, which means that each year we're 143,000 houses short. So even if we started building 300,000 houses next year, until we backfill them, we're down almost 2.8 million houses. Until we build those houses, demand will always outstrip supply, and that's why the buy-to-let market, as long as it's managed well, will always outperform most investments. Not all investments, but most investments.
I certainly would concur with that. I don't know if you'd agree with me, but I actually think now is the time that people should return, if they ever left, the buy-to-let market, simply because certainly I'm talking about my own town in Wrexham here, the yield on property now has dramatically increased, and when you compare it to what your building societies or your banks are offering you, particularly against a backdrop of 6 or 7% inflation. Chris, thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Vaughan.